Today, I am so excited to present this amazing lineup of people. I have been working with them for a couple weeks and have just been amazed at our conversations, and I'm looking forward to continuing it. So today's panel, we have named it Representation and Intersections of Identity. We have a very unique and diverse group of people here in front of us that are all highly involved and highly successful in the hockey community, respectively. I will begin with introductions. We have a few teachers on the panel, so we are going to go over some vocabulary, and we will hop into our session, which is going to be Q&A style for the most part. I will be presenting questions to the panel, which they will then be answering, and we can go back and forth a little bit if we want to, and then if there's time at the end, we'll open it up to questions. I'm going to go in the order in which I see folks in front of me. So first I see, it feels very polka dot door, I see Kurtis Gabriel, who is a professional hockey player for the San Jose Sharks. Kurtis is considered a very active ally in the hockey community. He was the first NHL player to score a goal using Pride tape in regulation play on his stick, and has spent a lot of time learning about diversity and inclusion. Next, I see Brock McGilis, who's the first openly gay former pro hockey player in North America. Brock came out in 2016 and has been my best friend and a thorn in my side ever since. Next, I see Kieran Block. Kieran is the first Black Canadian sledge hockey or para hockey player. Kieran started off playing upright hockey, played in the WHL at the University of Alberta, and had a cliff diving accident and shattered his leg. Is now back to upright hockey, but that wasn't without a stop on the national sledge hockey or para hockey team. Next in front of me, I see Jessica Platt, who is the first trans woman to play professional hockey. Jess played with the Toronto Furies of the CWHL. And wearing my favorite shirt on the panel is Renee Hess, the founder of Black Girl Hockey Club, also an educator, and very quickly rising to the top of hockey activism. So, before we get going, as I promised, we're going to do some vocabulary. We decided as a group that it might be best to share some definitions just to explain to our viewers how we operationalize them in order to have a bit of an understanding of how we're proceeding in the context in which we're using these words. We knew we were going to have a primarily academic audience in front of us, so we thought it best to do our best to push boundaries in our conversations a little bit, but also be very clear about the language we're using. All right, so I'm going to start off on the left with the word. So a word that we'll probably be using a lot today is privilege, an advantage, entitlement, or benefit granted to certain groups or individuals. This can be based on things like race, gender, social class, and physical ability. Something else we wanted to define was feminism. This one was important to us because I think sometimes in the hockey community, feminism is a scary word, and it doesn't have to be. So it's the belief in and the advocacy for equity among everyone, regardless of sex or gender, and that includes trans women for us. Next is fragility, a sense of defensiveness, denial, or avoidance when confronted with one's privilege. So oftentimes we'll hear that referred to as white fragility, or in my world of masculinity studies, we talk about fragile masculinity. And lastly, intersectionality. So as a theory, intersectionality was developed by Kimberly Crenshaw. We are using it as a lens through which to examine intertwining systems of oppression, or to simplify a lot, the idea that a lot of folks aren't just one thing, if you will. They have different identities that go together, and therefore they experience life differently. So in the examples of the definition, we have, for instance, a Black woman who also identifies as a lesbian. Those are intersecting experiences that that person has as they move through the world. And here Renee found a really wonderful diagram to help us understand intersectionality, but also privilege and oppression. So I'll give you just a moment to take that in and look it over. And if anyone on the panel has anything they would like to add as well at this point, please go ahead and do so. All right, I am going to move along. I have included our two main questions that are going to guide our talk today. So the first question I'll be asking of the panel, how can we make hockey more inclusive for the communities represented here? After that, we'll move on to why is it important to recognize intersectional identities? So if you'll give me a moment, I want to make sure that I see everyone really well. All right, and so if it's okay with you, we'll go in the order that I see you from bottom to top. So Renee, Jessica, Kieran, Brock, and Kurtis. Renee, whenever you're ready.
So when we're talking about how to make hockey more inclusive, we have to first and foremost address the gate.
Renee, wait, your sound is off.
Oh, my sound is off. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
you're perfect now.
What I was saying not on mute, but in some other world, was that first and foremost, if we're going to talk about how to make hockey more inclusive, we have to talk about gatekeeping and access. And when I talk about access, I'm talking about things like the cost of programming. Hockey is expensive, right? What ways can we engage marginalized communities in the sport of ice hockey without maybe having them purchase the full gear and the stick and the skates? And you know, one way is ball hockey, right? That's a wonderful way to engage folks of all ages, all classes in the sport of hockey, get them to fall in love with the game, and then you get them on the ice, right? And when we're talking about gatekeeping, you also have to think about things like the location of the rinks, how folks can get to the rinks. Is there public transportation to the rinks? This is an issue that I hear all the time from parents in hockey. When you, correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't play hockey when I was a youth, but when you play hockey, you've got to have a dedicated parent who is willing to take you regardless of what time of the day, what day of the week, what's going on at work, what's going on in other aspects of life. And so you really have to think about where the rinks are, how kids are getting there, how are they accessing ice hockey. And then from one of the most important things from my perspective is addressing hiring practices. Who is in those positions of power? Right? And I'm not just talking about on the ice, but behind the bench, in the media, the executives, board of directors. What does the board of directors look like for these youth hockey organizations? And then of course, you know, we've got to talk about policy change. If we really want to see hockey more inclusive for everyone, we've got to address some of these policies or non-policies that we see in youth hockey. And what I mean by that is really starting from the top down, you know, training people like the board of directors, creating and enforcing rules for all stakeholders involved, not just the kids, the parents, the coaches, the referees. There's got to be tangible ways that marginalized folks are protected out on the ice, starting with youth hockey. And then of course we look at professional hockey, which really needs to address disability needs, racism, sexism, toxic masculinity, and then, you know, just identifying and addressing the needs of marginalized local communities in an authentic way. Professional hockey rinks sit in some of the most amazing cities, right? We've got Los Angeles, Detroit, San Jose, Toronto. what are these teams doing within their communities to address intersectionality, to address sexism, racism, homophobia? Equity is different than equality, right? We had this conversation. It's not the same thing. Giving everyone equal access is great, but we have to recognize that people come from different backgrounds, that intersectionality is a real thing, and it's not just a theory, right? This is something that we experience every single day. As you know, for me as a Black woman, for Jessica as a trans woman, we are experiencing intersectionality as we go through life. And so addressing these things will help make hockey more inclusive.
Amazing. I love it. Jessica, tell us about how hockey can be made more inclusive for your community.
Well, for the trans community, in my opinion, I think a lot of it has to do with education and visibility and representation. Representation and visibility is a huge thing, because it's hard to aspire to be something that you've never seen before or that you don't know is possible. And a way that people can do this is to help make it more inclusive is having, there isn't a lot of trans women out there in hockey. There are some. There's more. I hear I hear about more and more as time goes by. But people in the hockey community have to be active allies. You have to make it a safe space. You have to recognize that people are different. There's trans women in sports, and being an active ally means standing up for someone, showing them that you have their back, and that you're not going to feel so alone as a trans woman in hockey if you have people that are going to have your back. When I came out, my team fully supported me, and I heard no negative things. Everyone wanted to learn. Everyone was so supportive, and that was huge for me. So essentially, we need to change hockey culture, complete overhaul. Like Renee said, from the professional levels to the beginner levels, we need to do a lot of work. At the higher levels, we can mitigate the damage that's done by years of conditioning and experiencing all the things that these men have learned. These white cis straight men, for the most part, have learned. And we can do this by humanizing people, humanizing trans women. People have an idea that the media put in their heads for so long that trans women are essentially just men. Personally, I try and show a positive example of a trans woman, and I think that everyone needs to be respected, and we're all human. But if we mitigate the effects that the professional players and the people at higher levels have all the ideas that they've had, everything that they've got stuck in their head over all the years, it's going to influence the lower levels, and the lower levels are going to, they're going to want to be like the pros, and they're going to be more inclusive, and they're going to be active allies. It's just going to have a positive effect like that. So it's going to stop the beginner levels from having those ideas ingrained in them from such an early age. If that makes any sense. I just feel like I went around in a circle, but active allyship would be huge. And it starts early. It starts at the pro levels. The pro levels affect the beginner levels, and vice versa.
I completely agree. Thank you. Kieran, go ahead.
Well, I think it's really comes down to an education. When I look at my experience growing up in the hockey world, as much as I am a person of color, I did have the advantages of having a white psychiatrist father. So I got to see kind of both ends of it. Most people, when they visibly see me, wouldn't see that. But when I look at what I can do now, I look at the school system as a teacher, what I can do in the school systems. I was a part of a couple hockey programs. One was a program for sort of gifted or not gifted, but athletes with access to resources, and one was not. Most recently, I worked in a program where if a child needed any equipment or anything like that, we would supply it. We would supply it through this program called All Sports. So we would get them set up with equipment. We would provide access to ice, and that would be through our school program and through our schooling. I would be leading it, which I really enjoyed because it does give somebody that's not white an opportunity to be in control and run some of the practices. So for every student that I had of color, of disability, or any other range of oppression, I was able to support that as just a role model that was in that role and in that position. And then also, as I'm able to skate, I'm lucky because I could do both, but I would also go to my sled at times. I would expose the kids to that. I was somebody that grew up in the stand-up world, in the able-bodied world, and had my accident later in life. And that transition was tough because I didn't really know where to turn. I only knew one or two other people that had experienced sort of accidents that changed their lives later in life. And I really gravitated towards them. And it was through those experiences that I found that community and that support. And that's what I tried to create where I go, is a community of support. Because as I entered the sledge hockey world, a lot of people at first were looking at me as, why am I here? Because usually if you're in sledge hockey, it's a connection to the sport if you're able-bodied, and people didn't realize because of how I physically walked and looked that I was disabled. And so now as I move more into like an academic career, I'm trying to just pay that forward. I'm trying to bring some more awareness with the places I go. Whenever I get an opportunity to speak, I try to just create more education about what sport is, about access to sport, and I try to support all people in their dreams of playing hockey. And I really like what Renee, you said about just getting people into ball hockey, because you're right, everyone can basically grab a stick, or there's so many programs out there that can put sticks in kids' hands, and then you can still teach that. And again, as somebody in the community, it's easy for me in a school to grab a bunch of sticks and really teach the kids what hockey is, and show them the teamwork, the camaraderie, and so on. And so I think, yeah, just getting back to the education of what oppression is, and showing kids that all kids can play. And again, as I move into my adult life, I'm able to be a person of color in the community, supporting that growth of hockey from a different view than our typical cis white male.
Thank you, Kieran. And I want to highlight something that you said that I don't think we mentioned much in our conversations prior to this, but is important, is this idea of the things that we don't always see. So the things about people and about their identities that aren't always apparent, or even right down to the idea of passing in any kind of way. So this was not in the vocabulary, I apologize, but so the idea of passing is within this context is the idea that you look like the dominant or privileged group in some way. So for instance, we can talk about whether racially someone passes as white and therefore might face less oppression. Or I know Brock and I talk a lot about him passing as straight and masculine. Not to say that Brock isn't masculine, but I think that because of the way he presents himself, he passes as something other than what he is sometimes. Yeah, I felt the need to bring that up. Brock, please tell us what your community needs.
Hi, I'm just want to say I'm really honored to be speaking with all of you. I think first and foremost, to Renee's point earlier about looking at, who's in charge and who's doing what, I think there's a really big distinction within my community, and I've spoken to Jessica about this before, on the men's side of the sport versus the women's side of the sport. And I think that has to be, for some minority groups, and for others it isn't the case. But I know for mine, queer people have been more included, and it's been more inclusive on the women's side from all the conversations I've had with people who have had those experiences. That's not to say that other groups haven't faced oppression, but it's just been more inclusive. And that also isn't to say that, there aren't queer or there aren't people on the women's side of the sport who adhere to the, hypermasculinity or the masculine, ideals of hockey culture. That said, I think also within the sport, we have to look at why it is the way it is. And if you look at one of the big things I always go back to is the insularity of it. And the fact that most sports growing up are played in schools. Whereas hockey, you're isolated from a very young age in an arena. You're broken up by age group, and you stay with those same players, especially if you're an elite level player, from the age of like 8 until you move on to junior hockey. So 6 nights a week, you're with the same 15 to 20 kids with the same coaches, and the coaches typically come from the culture and reinforce the same, issues that have been there forever, whether it's, homophobic, racist, sexist, et cetera, language, ableist language. And then from there, you move on to junior or to NCAA, and now you're with your teammates. You only really know each other when you get to these new communities, and you spend 7 days a week with them. They become your only friends. And then when you go home this summer, you hang out with the hockey boys that you grew up with, because those are the people you knew growing up. So it becomes incredibly insular, and it's reinforced by older people within the culture. And because of that, and because everyone's the 95% or so are white, everyone's assumed to be straight and whatnot. And because they're all the same age, the language within the culture is incredibly problematic, because there's no reason, there's no force there to prevent it from happening. And I think that is a huge deterrent for a lot of people. And I feel that within my community. I feel that with queer kids coming to me struggling and quitting the sport. So when we have that, I think that one of the major things we need to do, of course, as everyone else has said, it's getting diversity and getting representation. But I think we need to, and Jessica touched on this, humanize issues. We need to humanize issues so people see and recognize it on a human level. Not some political thing, not some anything else, but just these are human beings, and this is how they feel within this culture. And this is why. And then from there, I think people will be more receptive to education. And at that point, we can actually begin to create shifts, and we can look at boards, and these boards are problematic. We all know it. It's white, older, straight men who want power and control, and completely, as Renee said, gatekeep. I mean, I've been gate-kept and lied to and threatened from the NHL right down to local minor hockeys. And it needs to change, and it needs to evolve. And I think we need to humanize. And I think we need to be let in the doors to start the humanization process, to then bring in the academics with the knowledge and the years of education behind it, to put together proper programs so people recognize. And again, to Renee's point, it has to be for everyone. It can't just be for the coaches or the players. And I also believe that the programs have to be top down and bottom up at the same time. Because if you do a bottom up, people say, oh, we got to start with children. Well, you get to a certain level, you're playing junior hockey, major junior or NCAA. In the summer, you may be skating with NHL players. And then all of a sudden you're hearing professional players' language, and you think, oh, geez, that's the way I got to talk. That's the way I have to act in order to get to those levels. And then we see so much conformity from that. And then you see 10-year-olds looking up to the 13-year-olds who are looking up to the 15-year-olds, et cetera, et cetera. And then now I can go, I did a Zoom session with a school 2 weeks ago. And in the Zoom session, it's funny, one of the kids actually works out the same place as Kurtis. And it was a school, and I knew who the hockey kid was based off the way he was sitting and dressed in the Zoom session. And I asked him a question. I challenge myself every school I go to figure out from the audience who the hockey kids are, and I ask them questions. And the fact that I can point them out just sitting on a screen is indicative of how the culture has forced people to conform and not be their authentic selves. And if the straight, or those identifying as straight or presumed to be straight, white, cis men or boys have conformed this much and adhered this much, we're not leaving any space for differences. We're not leaving any space for others. And we have to create those spaces. So breaking down conformity while also humanizing issues and educating everyone, I think will go so far to opening up spaces.
Thank you, my love. All right, Kurtis, tell me what needs to happen from an allyship perspective here.
Yeah, well, obviously, honored to be here, and I work really closely with Brock too. So what he just said is a lot of what I think. But from my angle, as the cis man, the extremely privileged man here, professional hockey player currently, I think we just need a lot of compassion. I plan to say the humanizing too, but Brock really filled that in well. And I think it just comes down to compassion, because when that humanizing part happens, people, I think for the most part are pretty good people in the world. I think from me personally, I was naive to a lot of things. Doesn't mean I was a bad person, but I was heavily under humanized, to be honest, on these issues. So the compassion then comes in, and I think that's just a natural progression from the humanizing. So if we can do everything that Brock's saying, I know it's simple, but that's really the way he's told that to me many times. We talk about it, and he understands the culture so well. It couldn't be more on point. So the humanizing that leads to the education, the compassion that comes from that is what's really going to open the doors for more people like myself, who just have no honest clue what's going on. And I think also the visibility that I continue to try to share and try to encourage other guys to share is what's just going to make what Jessica said more normal. It just needs to be a normal thing that everyone knows now. So yeah, the compassion and the visibility, I think, to continue just pumping that out is really going to make everything that everyone's talking about here go the full way we want it to.
All right, thank you. I had originally said that I would let you sort of bounce back and forth a little bit after you had each answered, but in the interest of time, and because I think you all did a really good job of building each other up in your answers anyway, and finding those interconnections, if it's okay with you, I want to move on to the second question. All right, so this one is slightly heavier, but it's my favorite. So I want to talk about why intersecting identities or intersectionality is important in this context, and I will start with Renee.
Well, one thing that I say often is that without inclusion and the recognition of intersections, diversity is violence. Access is great and representation is wonderful, but if we stick, if I'm the only Black person on a board of directors, is my voice being heard? Where is my institutional support, right? The institutional support comes in the form of support groups. I know Kurtis has been playing with the San Jose Sharks, and I've been working closely with them over the last year or so as they developed an in-house program they call Teal for Change. And they tell me that they also created LGBT support groups, right? Support groups for their Black employees so that they can talk to one another and support one another, create community, which is, what Black Girl Hockey Club is all about. And why it came about was because that institutional support within hockey for Black women wasn't there. And it needed to exist. Simple things like checking in with your marginalized employees, right? Again, equity is different than equality. We need to recognize that that intersections mean that everyone has a different experience, and acknowledging those experiences is the key to making hockey culture more inclusive for everybody. And one thing that I have to say is something that I see a lot in ice hockey, especially now, is that diversity is not just hiring white women. Okay, we talk about diversity hires, and that's a false dichotomy, right? This is different experiences bring a more enriching perspective to any institution, and then we have to also acknowledge that the harm that white supremacy brings to all institutions, even hockey, right? Hockey is an old boys club, right? As Brock was saying, the people in positions of power are old cisgendered white men, and they have been for 100 years. And so in order to facilitate this hockey culture shift that we're talking about, Brock's absolutely correct. It has to start from the bottom up and the top down. But we have to remember to provide that institutional support, because intersectional identities, again, they're not just a theory, right? They're not just something that we bounce around and write papers about and talk at academic panels, but this is the daily lived life of many, if not all of us, and considering different parts of our identities, not just race, not just gender, not just class, but all of those things together. It's no coincidence that the concept of intersectionality was fleshed out by a Black woman, right? Black women live in those intersections at all times. So, just it's not just important, it's imperative for us to do this. And by not doing it, it's ignorance, right? It's enforced ignorance, it's self-enforced ignorance. We talked to Kurtis, you mentioned that, you were naive, and respectfully, it's frustrating to hear that from allies, because, I had a conversation a couple days ago with a gentleman about the Black Girl Hockey Club Get Uncomfortable pledge, in which we're asking, professional and individuals involved in hockey to sign a pledge, getting uncomfortable, to have these conversations about diversity and inclusion in hockey. And I mentioned this feeling as a person of color, as a Black woman, of walking into a hockey arena with thousands of people and not seeing another Black woman. And after the conversation, he was in shock. He had literally never thought of that. And as a person who walks around with this skin color, in this gender, in this body, that means he's never thought of me. And I don't know how to reconcile that. And I understand this idea of education and listening and learning and growing. But the time also now is for tangible action and tangible change. What are we going to do about it? Let's stop talking about it and actually be about it.
I love it. All right, Jessica, talk to me about why it's important to consider intersecting identities.
Well, first of all, I definitely think the support is, is really needed, because if, like you said, if you're the only Black woman on a board, or if I'm the only trans woman out there, and we're not getting support, then, it's exhausting, and who's really listening to you? So I love that point. I think it's really important to recognize intersecting identities, because, we really need to recognize the privileges that we might have and realize that not everyone shares these privileges. Like while I have the privilege of being white, I have the privileges that come with that. I don't have the privileges that come with, being a man, or being cisgender, or being straight. So to further equity, if we have to be actively aware of these privileges and disadvantages and do our best to neutralize them to have a more inclusive world. I've seen firsthand the experiences that you can have, because at one point I was a cis straight white man, and to see the privileges that I had taken away from me when I transitioned and really learned about who I was really eye-opening. I still have privileges as I'm white, cis passing, I can be straight passing, but I wasn't always. There was a time when I wasn't cis passing, and you get questioned about things as simple as using the restroom or something like that. And for me, everything turned out okay. It was really uncomfortable, it was a terrible time, but these confrontations can be significantly worse and lead up to things like murder and violent attacks. I have the privilege though now of being cis passing, so I don't typically have to deal with these things. So I have to keep that in mind for people who may not have that privilege. I lost male privilege when I lost male privilege. Playing pro as a male, I could make potentially millions, and playing pro as a woman a couple years ago, our salaries were $2,000 to $10,000. So kind of to look at the difference in the male privilege, the male experience versus the female experience, what women have to look for as a pro career, making $2,000 to $10,000 when men can make upwards of millions. It's kind of eye-opening, and women don't get the facilities, the training, the resources that the men get, from a base level. As well, when I transitioned, I felt, before I transitioned, I felt comfortable walking home at night alone, doing whatever I really wanted to do. And, when I transitioned, pretty much immediately, I was acutely aware of my surroundings, who was around me. And I made sure not to walk alone at night unless it was absolutely necessary, because, you never know what's going to happen. So, having these experiences, I think it really helps to empathize, and sharing these experiences, I think it helps for me to empathize with other people who have other identities that intersect. And so it helps me empathize with the issues from the other communities, much more than when I had all the privileges that I previously had before. I was very privileged, and I never really thought about anyone else. And I hate that about me. Like, I hate that. But, now I'm acutely aware, and I try to really actively be aware of the privileges I have and the privileges that other people might not have. And, never to really judge, and to keep an open mind and do what I can to even out those privileges and disadvantages, so we can have equity.
I think you bring up a good point, Jessica, and I'm going to broaden it, because I'm going to take it, and it might not necessarily be relevant to you in the same way anymore. But I think that one of the unfortunate things about this process is it often has to take for people to lose their privilege in order to gain empathy for others. And not everybody is going to go through that experience of losing their privilege, for better or worse. So yeah, I think, and now I'm thinking out loud in front of you, but I think it's that empathy that we need to find in a lot more people. I know I'm repeating what a lot of us are saying, but you really just struck a chord with me on this idea of losing a privilege in order to better understand what other people have been living their entire lives, right? So thank you for that framing. Kieran, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump right on to that, because I think that's a great segue for me, Jessica. So thank you. And Cheryl, really my experience, I'll say it was very similar. I did have experiences being visibly not white growing up in the hockey world where I faced racism and probably some classism unbeknownst to me. But really my perspective started to shift after I broke my legs. I went from being, when I look at the intersectionality wheel that we showed, I have to laugh because I hit literally the top and the bottom. As a heterosexual male, I'm at the top of privilege. When I look at persons with a disability and colored, I'm like right at the bottom. And it kind of makes me laugh because I wasn't always disabled. And then when I look at like my credentials and so on, and I look at how I build myself up around that wheel, it's like I hit on so many different points. And then it makes me reflect too. And I know we've kind of talked about being on panels and being in rooms with all these white males. And I was just reflecting on, you know, how many, and I'm going to use Brock, how many are like Brock where they're just too afraid, or they didn't have the courage, the support systems, the awareness, the ability and opportunity to come out. So they're living in a world still of fear, and they are these old white men or old white women, and maybe they're gay, or maybe they want to be trans, and they're stuck in this cis world because it's too scary. And I mean, when I say that, I'm speaking from my own experience of, it's scary to look at somebody that's disabled. And I know that was something that I really struggled with after I broke my legs, was coming to terms with my identity as a disabled person. And even to this day, I still don't really look at myself as disabled, but I have days. I have days where I physically can't walk. My back will be sore because I've compressed my spine, where I'm bedridden. And it's tough because I've gone to work at times and people are like, "Are you okay?" And you're limping. And it's like, well, yeah, I limp every day, but you just don't notice. And as I've gotten older and as I've lived with this, I've learned to be okay with it. I've learned to accept myself, which has been tough. It's been probably one of the toughest parts. And it has put a lot of perspective on the fact that I'm not white. I've come to terms with that as I see more people of color in sports, as I see more NHL players that are minorities. And it's, again, for me, a lot of my experiences happened later in my life. So I got sort of to see both sides of the coin. And I think it's just, I'm trying to change my perception, my frame of reference as I go to different conferences, as I speak on panels, and really feel that honor and that privilege of being the first. So when I found out that I was the first para sledge hockey player in the country, I thought, wow, like that's really cool. I never really knew before. And instead of taking that reference of it's not something or I'm upset because there wasn't somebody, it's more of that privilege and honor. And so when I went and I spoke on a panel as part of You Can Play as an ambassador, and I looked around the room, and it wasn't until another trans female pointed out to me that I was the only person of color in the room. And so for me, I'm learning to recognize more of the intersectionality in my own world, because a lot of times I'm so used to seeing white men typically in these areas that I'm excited that I get to be the first person of color in a room where everyone else is white. And I think it's just a really exciting time for that. And again, even to be a part of this panel, I mean, I feel so honored that I get to be on a board with so many people from different cultures, different diversities, different oppressions, and I just get to speak on my behalf. And we are, I think, starting the process, because I feel like 10 years ago, even this panel wouldn't have existed, because it would have been too scary in society to talk about these issues. And I just thought it was really great what Brock said too, just to go back a very quick little bit, just how he mentioned you can see a hockey player from a Zoom window. I agree. I've done a lot of talks over Zoom, especially with COVID, and I need to challenge those kids as well, Brock. I'm going to take that page from your book, because I see so many of them, and you can look at a window of 36 people, and as a hockey player myself, I can pick out all the hockey players. It's so easy to do, and that means that things need to start changing so that I can't recognize who's a hockey player and who's not. And then the last thing I really want to just mention, and it's a little bit different on the intersectionality scale, but I thought it was just a really cool example to share when I first started playing sledge hockey, we played this team out of Battle River, Alberta. And one of the members on the team was a single leg amputee. And what I thought was really great was the whole community created a sledge hockey team for this one individual. And I just thought that's putting the diversity rate front and center. That's creating that experience so that you are living it, because that's one thing that I challenge when I go and speak to communities and to schools and so on, is you don't have to go through what I went through to have this different perspective. And I do think it's true. It is hard, and it makes it a lot easier when all of a sudden you're an elite hockey player, going to the University of Alberta, potentially going pro after that, to boom, it's gone. You're now disabled. You now have to find this whole new identity of who you are. And when a community comes together, they all now have that perspective of, if somebody else becomes disabled or has a child with different abilities, well, now there's just more awareness, there's more experience, and that whole community is going to be better for it, and they're going to be able to better accept and understand the struggles and the challenges that some of these people face.
Thank you, Kieran. Brock McGilis. It is 11:47 Atlantic.
I'll make it quick.
Will you?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to speed talk through this. So first and foremost, for me, through a queer lens, I look at myself and the privilege I have as a, white, masculine presenting cis man. That opens up a lot of doors. It opens up a lot of doors that maybe some people, they're not open for within my community yet. And having queer youth come to me daily who are struggling and who are oppressed within the sport, it's an opportunity for me to hopefully open doors for them. I struggle with that though, because there are, as Renee said before, gatekeepers. And then I start thinking, if they're not letting me in the door and they're oppressing me, and I'm treated the way I'm treated, and instead they'll do performative actions like a pride night, which to me is like having the parade before winning the cup, or they'll and pink wash things, or they'll celebrate pride, but then you see NHL teams, 10 of them with partnerships with Chick-fil-A, who is an oppressive organization that is funding anti-trans bills and deliberately trying to destroy the Equity Act in America. To me, that is problematic, and it goes from the bottom right to the top and vice versa. And I receive threats from all levels of the sport, and I'm sitting there saying, well, then what's a queer person of color going to go through? What is a trans person going to go through? What is a queer woman going to go through? What is a Black trans woman going to go through when they are arguably the most marginalized people in society? And if they're not letting me in the door as, somebody who should be safe for them because I look like them and I can sound like them and I can bro it up with them if I need to get infiltrate, a little like recon spy mission, how's it going to be for everyone else? And that's why we don't have anyone in the sport. And that's why, to Renee's point earlier about support and whatnot, I find my support a lot of the time from different marginalized communities, and there's intersections in that where we can have empathy for each other and support one another through the harassment, trauma, and abuse that we face, and uplift one another so that we can power through and keep going in this. But it's got to change, because if I can be arguably moderate and safe in terms of gaining entry and engaging with these people, and they won't even do it with me, or they'll posture with me and pander to me, we're not creating spaces for everyone else. And so, Cheryl, I hope that was quick enough for you, and my rant was short and sweet, but yeah.
I'll give it to you. All right, Kurtis, talk to me about why it's important for you to understand intersectionality.
Well, I think listening to this whole thing, this whole time is just more education that I need and that everyone in my super ultra privileged category needs. I have every single thing at my disposal in life, and I'm aware of that. And it's pretty tough because, as Renee touched on, a lot of people, including myself, had no idea even about white privilege. So if Brock is having a tough time getting in, that's so eye-opening. And that's me sitting here wishing I was educated this and raised in this, and I wasn't, and gotta move past that. But it's tough to hear all that stuff sometimes, but it's nothing compared to what all these people have gone through. And I think that humanizing, that leads to educating, that's what when Brock talks about the top down and the bottom up. Hopefully we can talk to everyone here too, and me and Brock talk about getting in, keeping that door open a little bit, and getting into maybe sitting down with the commission of NHL, something like that. Hopefully through some of the stuff that I've been educated on, and it's led to that finalist thing. Hopefully we can use that to kind of, because all these things need to be turned over to you people. Like, it can't be the white guys who run everything just deciding how everything's handled. Like it's that there's no education there clearly, because they need to hand it over to the Brocks, the Renees, the Kierans, the Jessicas to properly do these things. And I think they just don't really fully understand that, but hopefully we can get there.
And Kurtis, you had mentioned too before that one of the big realizations for you was when you decided that you were going to become committed to being an LGBTQI2S plus ally, you realized that also meant learning about racism, learning about sexism. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's kind of everything else everybody said kind of got me thinking more, in the present about that. But yeah, it's realizing that if you do fight for one, that you technically fight for them all. And I don't think we all have time in our lives to fight every single issue. But I do think there is something to working on one. And when you do that, you realize you do support all the others. So you're going to share those things. You're going to learn the basics of the other groups, but focus on yours maybe for the change. So I don't know, that's something that's been eye-opening to me. A lot of this has been eye-opening. So yeah, it's kind of overwhelming sometimes, but again, that's why we're doing it.
Cheryl, can I add something really quick? That's all rooted in white supremacy.
Period. It is. Yeah.
Is that all you want to say?
Yeah, I'm keeping it short. You asked me to.
White supremacy, we'll end there.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to white supremacy, straight supremacy, that you can go down the list of I'm still, Renee asked me to join a book club, and I'm still going through this other book with my mom that it's hard. It's Layla Fassad's White Supremacy. Like, it touches on every single thing in here, and it's every person in my position should be reading that, and that's the education that we need.
I don't disagree. It is 11:54, so I am going to make the executive decision to cut out questions. However, I did want to share a couple comments with you that folks did leave. So Jamie Ryan, who's out at Queen's University, said, "Thank you so much for this excellent panel. I already follow all of you, but it's always such a pleasure to listen to all of you." And Chris Shields at Acadia University in Nova Scotia says, "I know time is short, but I wanted to say that as a white, financially stable, able-bodied, cisgender man, this has been a really amazing session, and thank you." I have been doing this all weekend. I don't know if this is Keelan or Kellen, so I apologize, but that person has been a wonderful participant in this conference all weekend. They said this was an amazing panel, would have loved to rub elbows with each of you and talk more at an in-person conference. Thanks for speaking today. Rachel Harvey, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, and Kurtis, someone wants to know if you could share the book title.
Me and White Supremacy by Layla Fasad.
One moment, I am going to put that right in the chat for everybody. It is 11:55. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to put this panel together. My job, for the most part, doesn't happen without the folks sitting in front of me, and I want to recognize that without you, I simply cannot do my work, and I would be all alone to learn, which I should be. It is my responsibility to learn, but I consider myself awfully lucky to have all of you. So thank you so much for being here. To the audience members, they're still thanking you in the chat. Please follow all of these wonderful humans on socials and get involved in their initiatives. They're still thanking you. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat. It's just all a bunch of love in the chat. All right. Does anyone have anything they want to add before I shut this session down? We're good. All right, thank you. There is another panel starting somewhere on the internet in 4 minutes, so I'll probably see you all there.